Hello, everyone, and welcome to JFK The Enduring Secret interview series. From time to time, here at JFK The Enduring Secret, we get a chance to interview important people in the JFK research community and others that are in some way connected to the story of the assassination. These interviews are often featured on our JFK The Enduring Secret YouTube channel, as well as our regular audio podcast. If you found us by chance and you are not already a regular subscriber to the audio podcast, please do subscribe at your favorite podcast outlet. And please do the same over at YouTube on our YouTube channel of the same name, JFK, The Enduring Secret. Today, Donald Trump, in one of his very early executive orders after taking the oath as president in his second term, has ordered the release of all of the JFK records, as well as records related to the RFK and MLK assassinations. This is an important step in compelling the government to publicly release the remaining JFK records that have previously not been disclosed and that are in the JFK Records Act collection. President Trump's intent is genuine here, but always the devil is in the details. So let's visit again with a familiar guest on the broadcast, Andrew Iler. Andrew is, in my estimation, the foremost expert on what the JFK Records Act says and how its technical language operates. And he's here today to tell us what this brand new, hot off the press executive order really means for all of us in the JFK research community, as well as the American public at large, on this incredibly important and increasingly germane issue regarding the records release. So, without further ado, let's get to our interview today with Andrew Iler. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're doing a video podcast with Andrew Iler. And for those of you who follow us on YouTube and who follow the regular, you know who Andrew is. We've had Andrew on a number of occasions. We're just happy to have you on again with some of the most incredible news that happened today. When the news came out that Trump was going to go ahead and release the rest of the remaining JFK records, the first person I thought to call was you, Andrew. So I'm glad that you were able to rearrange your schedule tonight and be on with us.
It's great. Always great to be with you, Jeff. Thanks for having me on.
Well, banner week. I don't want to get off the topic, but as everybody knows, just a few days ago, actually about a week ago, I think now, Shane Stevens, who's the grandson of Billy Saul Estes, released what was a 6-minute discussion between Billy Saul Estes and Cliff Carter. And it's a bombshell, and it obviously relates to Lyndon Johnson's implication in the murder of JFK. And so the world is abuzz about that, but that doesn't go around the world the same way that a tweet or an X comment does from President Trump. And today he made good on one of his promises, and that was to sign an executive order to actually release the records. So you're familiar with what's happened today. You know, we're obviously a long way from having the records in our hand. There's some complications, I'm sure, that always occur with things like this, but the intent is there. So maybe if you could just give us an update, and if we have time tonight, because I know it's late, and I know I have to eat a sandwich before I go to bed, you know that. And but if we do have time before we get off, I would like to talk a little bit about the original JFK Records Act and just remind everybody about some of the things that are in it. And if I'm going to do that, I want you doing it. Of course, there's nobody else I'd rather have do it.
No, that sounds great, Jeff. Yeah, I think the JFK Records has been a pet project of President Trump before his election in 2016. This was a real issue for him. He has consistently raised the fact that he wanted to release all of the JFK files. I have to give President Trump credit in, despite not releasing all of the records in 2017 at the deadline, he did release tens of thousands of records. Some of them had already largely been released, but he did expand what was in the public collection. But that being said, in 2017, the JFK Records Act did say that on October 26th, all of the records had to be publicly disclosed unless the president certified that specific records or redactions or postponements met the criteria of the act, and that became a bit of a, how do you say nicely, a bit of a fudge factor, because President Trump, he postponed tens of thousands of documents with no apparent detailed review on a document by document basis. And so that threw the JFK Act into a bit of confusion. And years have passed now. It's 2025. We've gone through now two election cycles. And the JFK Act, or the JFK records, actually became an election issue in 2024. And there were a few candidates who spoke pretty boldly about the need to release the records, and President Trump was probably the most outspoken of all of the candidates. And today he issued an executive order um, that with the intent to release the records, it seems. The executive order isn't perfect. It still puts a lot of the authority in the hands of the intelligence community, and but he has given senior members of the intelligence community a fairly short period of time in which they need to come up with a plan to fully and completely release all of the JFK records. An added bonus in the executive order was that President Trump also ordered all of the RFK and Martin Luther King assassination files also to be released. So it doesn't actually, the executive order doesn't actually today release all those files, but it does set up a timeline for the full and complete release of those files. But I guess the proof is going to be in the pudding.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really the question that has been debated, I think, all afternoon as soon as this came out, and almost everybody who's got an interest in it and read it carefully. There was a lot of exuberance in the headline, and then when you get into the details, it's pretty clear that there's another step that has to occur here before all. It's not as if they're all at the office right now packing them in files and putting them in white boxes and running them down to the National Archives for digitizing. I mean, that's just not happening right now at the moment. And not that anybody maybe perhaps expected that, but at the end of the day, the common dialogue in the street is that they're being released. I got at least 25 texts after this came out. I didn't see it first. Lots of people who have better feeds than I do got immediate responses on their phones or in their offices, and my phone was blowing up as a result of them mentioning it and wanting my take on it. And as you read it, sadly, as you pointed out, though, it does say that it's really setting up a review of these records. It's not necessarily setting up a complete, uh, unequivocal presentation of them to the public in 15 days.
Yeah, it's a little uncertain. And the fact that the director of intelligence uh, really has a senior role to play in setting up the plan to release the remaining records is a little bit of a cause for concern. President Trump has given a very short 15-day time period to get that plan back into his hands. And we really don't know. Will that plan mean it's going to take another 3 or 4 years to roll out these records? The fact is, these records have been fully reviewed from the 1990s onward. This will now be, I think, the third or fourth review process. The ARRB, the Assassination Records Review Board, clearly did a very thorough job vetting all of these records, reviewing them and making decisions about these records. President Biden set up transparency plans. The agencies have had access to these records since they were all put into the collection. The agencies clearly had access before the ARRB was originated. Um, the agencies originated a lot of these records themselves. They know what is in the records. Um, but President Trump's executive order does make it clear that it's his full intent to release these records fully and completely with no redactions. So I think right now we're kind of in a holding pattern. We can only hope that there's going to be continued pressure and that this just isn't a flash in the pan press release by the president to say that he's fulfilled his obligation, because really his obligation isn't going to be fulfilled until all the records are fully and completely released with no redactions.
Well, one thing I can say is in watching the small video clip of the execution of the actual executive order as he sat in the executive office, his comments at a very high level were unequivocal. I think his intent is to do that. Now, obviously the proof is in the pudding. They have to come out. Everybody's going to be waiting anxiously. I'm sure on day 16, if that plan has not been made, at least the existence of that plan has not been made public, as somebody will be asking some questions, at least in the research community for sure. And
Jeff, here's the thing. You can see your phone blew up. My phone blew up. Twitter or X is on fire with people. The mainstream media is covering this. This probably eclipsed all of the news today on most of the platforms and in a lot of the mainstream media. Americans are talking about this, whether they were born before 1963 or born after 1963. Americans care about this topic, and it is a hot issue. The majority of people want to see these records released. And I think President Trump knows that. And I still think there's an awful lot of pressure on him not to release these remaining 4,000 or so files that are still being kept secret.
yeah, one thing which I haven't talked about in the podcast. So for the podcast listeners, when I guess it was late November, obviously. I'm thinking back time wise, I'm trying to do the math in my head, but really less than 2.5 months ago, I think now, Andrew spearheaded a group that went to the National Archives. It actually was Andrew going to the National Archives and several of us going with him to assist in a process that at that moment seemed like it was the right thing to do in lieu of the impending litigation and the results that had come from that in the JFK Records case, the most recent litigation, that we needed alternative ways to get at the problem, the inability to get the records extracted as they should be, because right now he's dealing with a circumstance where the United States government is not complying with its own law. And the litigation that was brought by the Mary Farrell Foundation was well intended, but it fell short and it failed in court. And then the question remained for everyone interested, including the entirety of the American people, was how do you get at those records? We spent some time, Andrew did. There was a number of important things that occurred as a result of that, especially as it relates to final determination orders. Can you maybe take 2 or 3 minutes on that, Andrew? Not to get too deep because it's so easy to get so deep on this topic, but to just let the listeners know why you went, why it was so important to do the research and what you found.
Yeah, I'll try to be really quick on it and clear. It is a little bit convoluted. So when Congress passed the JFK Records Act back in the early 90s, they imposed a set of duties on the Assassination Records Review Board. And one of the duties was that when they were reviewing each assassination record, they had to create a written decision for each of those records. And they call their written decisions final determination forms. And the ARRB drafted tens of thousands of these final determination forms. And in the forms, they give the reasons for each postponement or redaction in each record. So some final determinations will have only one postponement. Some will have 15, 20, or as we've seen today with some media that's come out, some of them have had 72 redactions in a final determination form.
Wow, wow.
And each postponement will lay out the reasons under Section 6 for the postponement. But more importantly, what these final determination forms have to provide is a date on which the record is supposed to be released or reviewed under the periodic review requirements under the Act. And while we were down at archives in College Park, Maryland, we were able to obtain, with some difficulty, about 500 copies of final determination forms. Now, this is just a really small sample of what it should be and is in the collection, but we were able to get our hands on about 500 copies. And what we found is that the Assassination Records Review Board actually ordered hundreds of the 500 sample records fully released in 2006. And when we cross referenced these final determination orders that showed that the files should have been released in 2006, in over 80% of those cases, the files weren't released in 2006. They were released in 2018, 2022, 2023. And in a few cases, they appear to still be withheld, despite the fact that the Assassination Records Review Board ordered these documents released in 2006. That was a pretty startling finding for all of us who were down there.
So, really, not long after the Assassination Records Review Board completed their duties, handed it over to the National Archives to administrate, and the process was predefined. The records were pre-reviewed, and despite all of that, the next steps, which the government had an obligation to make good on, and they didn't. And then nobody called them on it, really, at the end of the day.
Well, Jeff, I mean, as you saw while you were down there, these final determination forms are virtually impossible to find. They're not digitized. They're not in any index or catalog of records. They don't have their independent record identification number. They were pretty much buried at archives. And I think it was just by luck that we were able to come across a box and a half of these records and take copies of them.
Well, first of all, Andrew, thank you for the work that you're doing in this area because it's obviously uncovering the fact that ministerially there is a period of time where only a minimal amount of effort was applied to try to comply with the law that was already in place and it was very clear as to what should have been happening in the period after the records review board shut down. And whether it was benign neglect by the government, which is hard to believe after this entire scenario occurred from 92 to 2000. But regardless, it happened. Obviously, when the deadline came and these records were not produced, that's when a lot of people got more serious about what happened. And we won't go into the details of it. You've talked about some of the other executive actions that have taken place since 17, things like the Ganon memo, which was obviously a memo that was drafted in the executive branch that essentially, I'm going to say, absconded with what the law of the land was that was already in the JFK Records Act. and which is sad to have seen that occur. But I think, in fact, it did, and it certainly did lead eventually to perhaps the litigation that came about here more recently, or at least that it was a factor. And we're still fighting to get the last bit of it. We don't know what will come out of it. Maybe it's something really relevant. Usually, almost in every data release of records that has occurred, there's been at least a small portion of the records that have helped to complete a theory or a hypothesis, or to give researchers the additional information that confirms important things that they were hoping to get confirmation on, or has led them into other areas of research which were critical and which were not relevant before they got those documents. So it isn't necessarily something where we're going to, no one expects a memo in the middle of it that says I shot JFK signed by. I don't think that's going to happen. But at the end of the day, this is like, and we may have this puzzle that if it's 1,000 piece puzzle, we may never get the last 50 pieces of it, but we'll get enough filled in that if, if you stare at what has been completed, you'll become pretty clear to you what the answer is, what the visual is.
Jeff, the one thing I would like to add, since you brought the Gannon memo up, and I won't go into the weeds here, but I did take a look at the Gannon memo again in the last week, and the Gannon memo put it forward to President Trump in October of 2017 that most of the ARRB decisions postponed the release of records until 2017. And Gannon didn't mention to the president that that the ARB made final determinations to release these files. And the sense that I'm beginning to get is that the archivist didn't tell either President Trump or President Biden that there were tens of thousands of decisions already made to release these records. And the Gannon memo certainly didn't tell President Trump that there were thousands of decisions to release these records in the early 2000s. And so I'm not clear whether either President Trump or President Biden made their decisions to postpone, knowingly overriding decisions that were made years ago to release these records. So I think that's an important thing to make clear to President Trump as he's waiting for his senior intelligence leadership to come back and with their plan. I think President Trump needs to know that in the 1990s, the ARRB reviewed and made specific decisions, and he's now overriding those decisions in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important point for the public to understand. It's easily misunderstood that there was a requirement to review all of these records and make a determination at that moment, when the reality is that the Records Review Board already made conclusions on so many of these records, right? I mean, they already had a predetermined date of release, and it's really almost inconceivable that after all of that detail work by a very erudite group of people who did more in-depth understanding or review and understanding of those records, that then in the aftermath of this, folks who haven't done any of that kind of work or analysis are now sort of unilaterally making decisions without the benefit of the meticulous work that was done by the ARRB.
The ARRB did a fantastic, thorough job. They didn't have enough time to do everything, but with the time that they had in 4 years, they really went through these records looking for needles in a haystack. And the fact is, American taxpayers paid tens of millions of dollars for this process to unfold in a accountable and transparent way, and that's what the ARRB did. And I think it's quite shameful that that the end result of those reviews were these final determination forms that have been apparently totally ignored.
Well, Andrew, we've got a little bit of time left. I don't know if you want to pivot into looking a little bit at what is in the actual JFK Records Act and point out some things that you feel are important there. If you're, if you're willing, then we're willing.
Yeah, I mean, there really is so much in the act, and I don't know how deep your listeners and viewers are interested in going, but I mean, the main parts of the act really revolve around Section 6 of the Act, which set out the criteria under which records can be postponed from public disclosure. Section 6 sets out a standard of review for these records. It requires there to be clear and convincing evidence that a record warrants postponement under the very, very tight criteria. The other section I think that's been largely overlooked is Section 5G1 of the Act, and that imposes a strict ministerial duty on the archivist to conduct periodic review on postponed records. And it's a strict ministerial duty because the archivist has to review these documents consistent with the final determinations made by the Assassination Records Review Board in these final determination forms. And so the ARB provided specific review dates for the archivist to comply with. And that periodic review duty is still in effect. The law makes that operable to this day, and it's not clear whether that's happened consistent with the ARB final determinations either.
Briefly went back and looked at the act before we got on the show tonight, and I noticed there was one provision in it that said that every 30 days there shall be a printing in the Federal Register of any of the deferrals that occur. So, technically, and obviously you can look at things and say there's no records up for review in a 30-day period. So I assume there could be lots of 30-day periods, but there's supposed to be, by the letter of the law, something in the Federal Register every 30 days.
Is that under Section 9?
Yeah, I think it is. I can't recall
Yeah.
exactly where. I'll pop it up when we finally put this up on. But
Yeah, I think that's Section 9D1 of the Act or 9D2 of the Act. And really what you can see, Jeff, is that when the ARB was reviewing these records, um, th there were massive dumps on the Federal Register. And these are called formal determinations versus final determinations. And you can see just rows and rows and rows of records that were either postponed or ordered released at a future date by the ARRB. The ARB was very transparent and very public with all of their decisions. And the one thing that interested me, and I shared this with you earlier this week, is that there are digital copies of all of these final determinations available, and the ARB transferred all of those over to National Archives. So it should not be that difficult for the National Archives to pull the full catalog of final determinations to see exactly what these orders were back in the 1990s.
Yeah, that's awesome. The fact that that exists is an important element because, as you and I talked about, in the absence of an electronic version of these, it's one would wonder, you'd have to have a room full of scribes to actually comply with the idea that, you had a tickler list that you could go through and actually review these records that were deferred because there was so many of them. So I'm glad to hear that it actually has been confirmed that it's at least supposedly in existence. It'd be a great thing to get our hands on too, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think this should be one of the first things that the archives digitizes and publishes so that the American people can see that their money went to good use.
Yeah, and obviously that the right kind of energy went into on a timely basis the re-review of records that had been scheduled for deferrals because we know that I think to give the government to be fair in the entire discussion around this to give the government the opportunity to review things and determine if a security risk in the disclosure outweighs the public interest, which is the basic concept in the act, which gives them the authority to defer things. You understand that intuitively it makes sense, but at the end of the day, and this is really sort of the simple and very seminal question that spawned the entire act to begin with. In fact, the long version of the name of this act, the one focused word is the expeditious release of these records. And the last preamble reason that was listed in this document as to why this was happening, why we were putting together a process to release these records is that even at the time of this legislation, it was some 32 years or so after the fact, and there really just wasn't much reason at 32 years to hold them back. And it's just really an amazing thing that we're sitting here in a year that's basically double that now, right? We're coming on almost to 64 years. It'll be a hop and a skip before we're at 64 years, twice that time frame. And we're saying the same thing, that why haven't they released them? And it's all it does is create suspicion. There's probably no real good reason for doing it. Nobody wants to see the name of somebody released that could result in harm to anyone or to their families or to national security in any way. So I don't think anyone would be irrational, but it's hard for people and even that are experienced in the intelligence community aspects of this to say after 64 years that there would really be anything that significant to withhold that would be such a of such a nature that the security risk would outweigh the public good to release it. So hopefully they will. That's the big thing, right? Hopefully we'll get it. And so again, Andrew Iler, in my opinion, again, I think I said it at the beginning of the show, but I'm going to say it again. In my mind, I see Andrew as the foremost expert that you can go to on the JFK Records Act. I think he knows more about this act than anybody on the face of the planet. We were lucky enough to have you on tonight. So thank you. Hopefully, we're going to come back in about 15 days and we're going to see a plan. And hopefully, that plan says that they're all coming and it's in a very short time. And I think we all have to keep our fingers crossed and say a small prayer if that's your thing and have a little faith either way that the current administration is going to do what it has pledged it will do. And as a research community, I think we have to be thankful and respectful and receptive and records as an important part of history and read them in context, sort of equal protection to all involved in terms of being fair arbiters of what we see.
Jeff, it's been really good talking to you tonight. And I do have to say, I'm very excited for some of your upcoming shows. So I will be tuning in regularly over the next few weeks. I hope to hear some good stuff out of JFK and the Enduring Secret.
I sure hope so. This whole thing, we were going to finish up Mexico City, and we've temporarily suspended our Mexico City shows because of all the other things going on, and particularly this Billy Saul Estes clip. We're going to tell that story that was coming logically in this sequence, but we're going to expedite it as a result of all this. And, like I say, folks, you can't write this stuff. Well, thank you again, Andrew. Look forward to you coming back on the show very soon in the near future for us to get an update on just how all this is coming along. Thank you. And again, appreciate all your fine efforts in all of this. It's appreciated by everyone in the research community. And in addition to that, if you're a patron of any type of democracy here, and you happen to be listening in on this, you know that this is what Andrew's doing and what so many others have done too as well, are for the good of the order here. So thank you.
Take care, Jeff. Thank you.
You too.
Okay.
Lastly, sir, we have an executive order ordering the declassification of files relating to the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
That's a big one, huh? A lot of people are waiting for this for years, for decades. And everything will be revealed. Okay? Give that to RFK Jr.
Yes, sir.
Okay? Okay, thank you very
Mr.
much.
President.
Thank you again for listening today to another episode of JFK The Enduring Secret interview series. Please join us on a regular basis, and you'll find our podcast at your favorite podcast outlet, as well as our YouTube channel on YouTube. And that's JFK The Enduring Secret.